Hi Year 9. Welcome to your lesson for this week, which is on the Anglo-Saxon Church. First, I want to go through some recall practice with you from last week's lesson, and I would like you to identify what are the features of a Saxon village and a Saxon Burr are. So, just in case you need to remind yourselves, on the left here we have got a Saxon village, and then on the right we have got a Saxon Burr. Then I would like you to describe what the differences are between a Saxon village and a Saxon Burr. So if you would like to pause the video here and spend about 4 to 5 minutes writing your answers down on either a piece of paper or on the PowerPoint in the answer box here, you are welcome to do so. Okay? Okay, let's go through some ideas then. So for the Saxon village, some of the main features that we've got is that we have got some open land and plenty of greenery as well in a Saxon village. So this meant that with the open land, the Saxon villagers could build a couple more villages if they wanted to do so. They've got the resources there that are close by, mainly wood, and they would also make new fields from the open land as well. Each village would have an area of common land for everyone to use to graze their cattle onto. So you can see here that we've got a couple of animals, probably cows, that would just be eating from the land too. Next feature that we've got, so we have the Saxons would have built a water resource, so they would build their villages close to either a bit of a lake or a stream or a river. And that would be so that they would have a continuous supply of water for themselves, their animals, and to irrigate or to water their crops on the farms. And then we've also got the Saxon houses that were rectangular huts made out of wood with roofs that were made with thatched, well, they were thatched with straw, and each family house would have one room with a hearth, with a fire for cooking, heating, and to provide them with light. So let's have a look at the Saxon Burr. What features have we got here that we might have identified? So the first one is that there is a gate that leads you directly into the burr and out of the burr as well. So that would have a road, like I said, that leads you in and out of the burr. This would give Saxons an opportunity to trade with nearby burrs with certain goods such as precious metals, food and other building materials. We've also got this almost type of fence that is built around the burr. So that is what is known as a palisade. So that was built out of wood typically, and these would provide strong fortifications to protect the Saxons from invaders or attackers, and also predatorial type of animals, so foxes or wolves that would come in and destroy the livestock living in the burr. And then we have a garrison. So a garrison would be amongst one of these type of huts that have been built here. They would house people such as soldiers, and they would be stationed there to help protect the Saxon villagers living there. Okay, they would be there to defend the burr. And then we've got a church there as well. So a church or a place of worship would be available for all Saxons to go and pray and try and lead a religious lifestyle, which is going to be the basis of our lesson. And then we've got what differences are there between a Saxon village and a Saxon Burr. So I'm just going to point out one of the differences that we've got. So one of the differences is that a village was designed to work on the land and provide resources for the country, whereas burrs were created to protect and encourage further trade. Okay? So our lesson title for today is How Moral Was the Anglo-Saxon Church? And our learning outcomes for today we're going to understand how religion played a part in people's everyday life and what the problems the Anglo-Saxon Church had. And then we're going to answer how convincing is interpretation A about the problems that the Anglo-Saxon Church faced. Okay, so here's just a little bit of context about what the Anglo-Saxon Church was like. So what religions did the Anglo-Saxons believe in? So before the Saxons came over to England, they were predominantly pagan, and then there was a shift of them converting towards Christianity. So in Anglo-Saxon England, the English Church had a blend of traditions and unique ways of worshipping faith. For example, the English Church allowed the Bible to be written in Old English rather than Latin, as that was the language spoken at Rome, which housed the Roman Catholic Church, and they insisted on that. The Bible also contained variations, so a lot of different examples that told the story of Jesus from Celtic points of view. And the English Church was also known to focus on not only Saxon saints, but older Celtic saints too. These Anglo-Saxon and Celtic saints were often linked to a local area were saints that local people felt were familiar. So if the saints were more popular with that person in that area, that is the typical type of saint that they would worship. Okay, so the saints were part of their everyday lives, and this is known as pluralism. So this meant that people in Anglo-Saxon England had the freedom to worship different faiths, making England extremely religiously diverse. So how was religion involved in people's everyday lives? We've got that religion played an important part in people's everyday lives. It influenced England in two ways. So the churches in England were very rich and powerful, and they played a strong part in helping the government make decisions about the country, which we'll get onto later in the lesson. And it also played a big part in everyday life in all villages and in the towns too. Why was faith so important back then? So the Saxons heavily believed that heaven and hell were real places. They knew that after death their souls would go to heaven or hell depending on how religious they had been and how they had lived. It was vital for their souls that people went to church to worship God. This meant that the priest in each village had a very important role, safeguarding the people and their souls. So in essence, it just wanted to protect everybody. Okay. So here we've got an example of how the Saxons would be encouraged to lead a good and religious life. We've got on the right hand here a doom painting, which would be displayed in most churches to serve as a reminder as to what would happen to people if they lead good or bad lives. So your next task, I would like you to describe what you can see in the doom painting and then explain how this would make you feel as a Saxon who saw this for the first time in a church. So I'd like you to spend about 2 or 3 minutes just analysing that doom painting and then spending another 2 minutes just writing down your initial thoughts and ideas as to what you can see and then how this would make you feel as a Saxon. Okay, so if you want to pause the video here and complete that task for me, please. Okay, so here's a little bit more context about what the church was like. The church was very clearly organised. So we've got at the top of, if you imagine like a hierarchy, we've got the Pope who is at the top, and then on the second level there would be archbishops. In England there are 2 archbishops, one of Canterbury and one of York, who are in charge of the churches in their regions. Then next below the archbishops we've got bishops. There are about 15 bishops in total in England. Each one is in charge of a diocese or a see. The bishops were responsible for making sure that the village priests obeyed the church laws and carried out religious services properly. The Anglo-Saxon churches also had many monasteries and convents which housed monks and nuns, and the task of the monks, that should say, and nuns were to pray and also write histories, create tapestries, and they would act as teachers and advisors to lords or thanes. They also sold crops grown on monastery farms, which made the monasteries wealthy, and the church therefore owned 25% of the land in England. Moreover, the bishops were very rich, important people, and they also served on the Witan, so the Saxon government, as the king's royal advisors. Now, your next tasks I would like you to complete. Number 1, how does the evidence above show that the Anglo-Saxon Church had a significant amount of influence and power over England? And then number 2, do you think it was right for the church to have this much influence? So I'd like you to spend about 10 minutes just answering those questions for me, so 5 minutes each, having a go at explaining your thoughts and ideas. Okay, so again, you can do this on a piece of paper or you can do it on the PowerPoint. So if you'd like to pause this video here for me, please. Okay, so here is your main task for this lesson. So many religious churches in Europe thought that the Anglo-Saxon Church had far too much power and influence, and they said that the Saxons failed or ignored to live up to the church's teachings in other ways. So you're now going to read about some of the various ways in which the religious people of Saxon England's way of life may have caused problems for the church. So read through the different aspects and make a judgment as to how much of a problem this would have been. And then you can explain why this might have been a problem for the church. So I'm just going to demonstrate what I would do in this instance. So I'll show you. You would place the arrow that's on your worksheet along the thermometer to show what your judgment is on the level of the problem that the aspect of the church would cause. So I'll just show you here. So here we've got representing the church in a professional conduct. So here is our evidence. People such as priests, monks and nuns were supposed to have conducted themselves in and outside of religious organisations in a professional manner. However, on numerous occasions, people seem to have been fond of binge drinking and overeating, especially on holy days, so where they're worshipping or celebrating different saints. So here is our thermometer, and I'm going to move the arrow up towards the level of a problem that it would have been in that time. So I think that it would have been quite a problem for the Anglo-Saxon Church, and here on the right hand side is my explanation. So I think this might have been quite a problem for the church because priests and nuns were meant to be considered as representatives of the church and God. If they were presenting themselves as being too drunk or overeating, then they were not focused on the church and they may end up committing some sins against God. So for example, if they had drunk too much, then they might possibly get into a fight, okay? Also, priests and nuns were meant to live simple lives and they were not meant to favour any lifestyle that demonstrated them as living elaborately and showing off their wealth and power, okay? They were meant to demonstrate that they were to show charity, they were to show obedience, and not really to have any money for themselves. They were meant to spend it on helping the poor, helping those in need, rather than spending it on overeating or over drinking. Okay, so that's essentially the first one done for you. If you've got a different judgment on this problem, then you can move the arrow up and down as you wish, and if you have a different explanation as to why you've chosen that level of judgment, then you can write your own explanation. So I'd like you to spend about between 15 and 20 minutes on this task, as I really want you to think about why these actions of the church may have been problematic for Anglo-Saxon England. Okay, so if you want to pause this video here and complete that task for me, you can do so. Okay, so how did these problems affect England? Okay, so how did the problems of the church affect England? So we've got the Archbishop of Canterbury here as an example. His name is Stigand, and he became a priest as a young man. However, he did little to improve the quality of the church or the priests when he became Archbishop. He mainly served the king and an earl named Harold Godwinson as their advisors. Now, we'll come on to those two people when we come back in September. By 1065, Stigand held two positions within the church. He was the Bishop of Winchester and also the Archbishop of Canterbury. He was being paid for both positions, which was under the sin of pluralism. So we'll come back to that key term, pluralism. So whilst Anglo-Saxons worshipped a couple of different religions, it also falls under if you are holding different positions within the Saxon Church as well. And as a result of this, Stigand refused to give up his post as bishop, and the Catholic Church also accused him of simony, and he sold off church posts to the highest bidder. Simony means that he's just selling off different posts, different pieces of land for his own gain of improving or providing more wealth for himself. Stigand kept his influence because he had the support of Harold Godwinson, the Earl of Wessex, and with Harold's support, Stigand gained land in 10 shires and he ultimately became a very rich man. So another task that I would like you to do, I want you to decide what this information tells you about the condition of the church in Anglo-Saxon England by 1065. Okay, I would like you to spend about 5 minutes or so on this task, just briefly explaining what this information tells you about the condition of the church in England. Okay, so if you want to pause this video here for me. Okay, so on to our final task for today's lesson. So you're going to complete a convincing question for me, which you will have done in your third lesson of the Normans. So this is nothing new to you. We're just going to have a bit more practice on writing your answers up for a question like this. So how convincing is interpretation A about the problems that Anglo-Saxon England faced? So again, this is worth 8 marks, and you would normally spend about 8 minutes on a question like this. 10 minutes on a question like this. So we're going to look at the structure again, and we're going to just talk through how you would answer a convincing question like this. Okay, so remember, for this type of question, you need to use your own knowledge to explain why you find this interpretation convincing or accurate. Okay, here is our interpretation by a historian. Whilst the archbishops and bishops were following a life of corruption as opposed to religion, thousands of priests in England were poorly educated. The Pope criticised their actions and the English Church for allowing its priests to marry, something that had been discouraged on the continent for hundreds of years. In the eyes of the Pope, this was a sign of backwardness and low standards of the English Church, right up towards 1065. So, here is an answer that I would provide, a model answer from myself. So again, we've got the interpretation up at the top here, and we're going to try and find evidence to prove that this interpretation is indeed true. Okay, so again, step 1, you're picking a quote from the source. Now, I've chosen that I think this interpretation is convincing because it says the archbishops and bishops were following a life of corruption as opposed to religion. And now I'm going to back that up with my own knowledge and evidence. So I find this convincing because the archbishops and bishops, such as Stigand, misused his power and influence to promote his own wealth as he held the position of Archbishop of Canterbury and Bishop of Winchester. The Pope accused Stigand of committing the sin of pluralism and simony as he held more than one religious position, and he would regularly sell off his church posts to increase his wealth. Stigand was also influential towards the earls such as Harold Godwinson and King Edward the Confessor in 1065, and therefore he was able to maintain his position as archbishop and bishop as he had the support of the king. Okay, so that's just an example as to how I would answer a question like this by finding this interpretation convincing. Okay, now what I'd like you to do is to do the same but for two different quotes. So I want you to pick a second quote and then a third quote and back that up with your own knowledge. Okay, so that would be from the information and your judgments from beforehand. So you're trying to tell me why this interpretation says that there was huge problems with the Anglo-Saxon Church. One thing that I find quite useful is to underline the quotes that you might want to use and probably look up what certain words mean. So for example, here we've got backwardness. If you're not sure what that means, I would look that up, and also find out what it means that the Pope criticised their actions. Remember that the Pope is at the centre of the Roman Catholic Church, so he is above the archbishops, if you imagine that hierarchy pyramid. Okay, so he's essentially in charge. Okay, so I want you to spend about 10 minutes on this task, writing 2 new paragraphs for me. So again, you're picking a quote from the source and then you're backing it up with your own knowledge. If you've got any questions as to how to answer this question a little bit more, or if you're stuck on any of the other tasks, please feel free to email myself, Miss Bartley, or Mrs. Hudson. Okay, but this is your final lesson for this academic year, and then back in September when we all return, you will continue with your Normans lesson, and we will hopefully see you soon. Okay, thank you very much, Year 9.